I had skipped lunch again. The meetings had run longer than expected, and my stomach was making noises loud enough to embarrass me in the elevator. It was already past 7 in the evening when I finally left the office. The sun had dipped low, painting the sky in soft orange and pink. Traffic was heavy, so I took a side road I rarely used, hoping it would be faster. As I drove along, I spotted a small diner with a glowing red sign that read Eddie's Eats. It looked like one of those old-school places that never really changed. Same booths, same tile floors, probably the same jukebox from the 80s too. The parking lot was half full, which to me meant the food was probably good. I turned in without thinking twice. I wasn't dressed for anything fancy. Just sneakers, a hoodie, and some old jeans. Nothing flashy. It had been a long day, and I wasn't trying to impress anyone. I just wanted a hot meal and a quiet place to sit. The second I stepped inside, the warmth of the diner wrapped around me like a blanket. The smell of fried chicken and fresh coffee filled the air. The lights were soft, and a slow country song played in the background. It felt like the kind of place where regulars had their tables. I waited by the entrance where the hostess stand was, but no one came. I could see a few staff members behind the counter. One of them noticed me, made eye contact, then looked away like I wasn't even there. Weird, but maybe they were busy. A minute passed, then 2. I glanced around. There were at least 6 empty tables. Finally, a young woman with a name tag that said Karen walked over. She didn't smile. "Do you have a reservation?" she asked, arms crossed. I chuckled softly, thinking she was joking. "No, just one person. Is that okay?" She looked me up and down, eyes pausing at my hoodie. "We're fully booked right now," she said flatly. I turned to look at the empty tables again, just to be sure I wasn't imagining things. "Oh, really?" I asked. "Those tables look free." She shrugged. "Those are for people who call ahead." "Can I wait for one then?" Her expression turned hard. She leaned in slightly and lowered her voice. "We don't serve your kind here. Maybe try somewhere else." I stood there, frozen for a second. Your kind. What did that even mean? I wasn't loud. I wasn't rude. I hadn't done anything. The diners nearby had stopped eating. They'd heard her. Some looked down at their plates. Others stared at me, half curious, half uncomfortable. I could feel the heat rise in my chest, but I didn't want to cause a scene. Not here. Not like this. So I nodded slowly, turned around, and walked out. The door jingled behind me as it shut. I got back into my car, sat in silence, and stared at the building. The red neon sign flickered once, like it was mocking me. I wasn't angry about the food. I could eat anywhere. I was angry because she didn't even know who I was. She made a choice based on how I looked. And that choice, it was about to change her whole world. As I sat in my car, the silence felt heavy. The air was cold, and I didn't want to drive home yet. I needed a moment to clear my head. I looked back at the diner through the rearview mirror. Eddie's Eats seemed like a typical small-town place. Nothing special, just an ordinary spot to grab a meal. So why had I let it get to me? Maybe it was the way she said it. "We don't serve your kind here." The words echoed in my mind like a slap. I hadn't even had the chance to sit down. She didn't know anything about me. Didn't know I could have paid for that whole restaurant to eat, just by picking up the tab. But that's not what it was about. It wasn't about money or status. It was about respect. I glanced at the time. Almost 8 now. I wasn't hungry anymore. At least not for food. But I was hungry for something else. I needed to prove something. I couldn't just let this slide. People like her, people who think they have the right to judge others based on their appearance, shouldn't get away with it. So I pulled out my phone and did something I hadn't planned. I Googled Eddie's Eats to see if there were more locations. I knew it was a local chain, but I had no idea how many they had. The first search result gave me the answer. Eddie's Eats wasn't just the one diner. It had dozens of locations all over the state. I scrolled through the site, and then I found it. The parent company behind Eddie's Eats. I clicked on the link. The page loaded slowly, but when it did, I found what I was looking for. It was a small, struggling chain owned by a barely known holding group. The information listed their contact numbers, addresses, and even the management structure. I knew what I had to do. This was bigger than just one rude waitress. This was about showing them they couldn't get away with treating people like that. But before I could do anything else, I made a decision. No complaints, no drama. I wasn't going to just leave a bad review or call them out on social media. That wasn't enough. I needed to make an impact, and I didn't need to be angry to do it. All I needed was patience, a plan, and a bit of leverage. I picked up the phone and dialed my lawyer's number. The line rang twice before he picked up. "Hey, it's me," I said, trying to sound casual. "I need you to look into a company for me." "Eddie's Eats." "Yeah, the diner chain. Can you get the financials for me? And maybe look into their ownership structure." There was a brief pause on the other end. "Sure. Why?" "I'm thinking about making them an offer," I said, feeling the words come out almost too easily. "It's time for a little change." "Okay, I'll get on it." We hung up, and I sat there for a moment, staring at the flashing diner sign in the distance. The more I thought about it, the more excited I became. This wasn't just about getting back at one rude hostess. This was about something bigger. The next day, I would begin my plan. But for now, all I had to do was wait. The next day, I couldn't stop thinking about what had happened. It wasn't the food that bothered me. It wasn't even the fact that I'd been treated like I didn't belong. It was the way she looked at me, like I didn't matter. Like I wasn't worth the time to even be polite. I was just another customer, and to her, I was invisible. But the truth was, I wasn't invisible. I was anyone but that. Sitting at my desk in the office, I stared at the papers in front of me. The day was dragging. I could barely focus on the tasks at hand, so I did what I usually do when I need to clear my mind. I took a walk. I walked down the hall, past the glass windows that looked out over the city, and out into the street. The fresh air hit me like a splash of cold water. I wasn't really walking to clear my head, though. I was walking to make a decision. It was like a switch had been flipped. My mind had gone from annoyed to determined. If I let this go, if I didn't do something about it, I'd never be able to let it go. The feeling would always eat at me. "We don't serve your kind here." How many other people had they turned away? How many others had been treated the same way I had? It was a small insult to me, but I realized it could be so much worse for someone else. Someone without the resources, someone who didn't have the power to do something about it. They didn't just affect me. They affected everyone they treated like that. The more I thought about it, the more I understood that it wasn't just about me getting a table. This was about standing up for something. Standing up for the idea that no one, no matter who they were, should be treated like they didn't matter. That's when I decided to call my lawyer again. He picked up almost immediately. "Hey," I said, "I'm ready to make my move. Can you set up a meeting with the owners of Eddie's Eats? I want to make them an offer." "You sure about this?" he asked, almost sounding concerned. "It's a lot of money. You're talking about buying a whole chain." "I'm sure," I said, taking a deep breath. "I don't just want to buy it. I want to change it." There was silence on the other end. "Change it how?" "I want to take control. Turn it into a place where everyone is welcome, where no one has to feel like they're less than because of how they look or what they're wearing. I'm tired of the way people get treated like that." "All right," he finally said. "Let's do it." We agreed on the plan. It wasn't going to be cheap, but that didn't matter to me. Money wasn't the issue. Making a difference was. I didn't want to just sit back and complain about bad service. I was going to own it. I was going to take that restaurant chain and make it into something better. Something that actually treated people with respect, no matter what. That afternoon, I went back to my office and began to prepare for the next step. I could feel the excitement building inside me. This wasn't just about buying a restaurant. It was about setting an example, about proving that people who think they're above others could be shown that they were wrong. It wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about getting back at the hostess. It was about showing them all that no one gets to decide who belongs and who doesn't. And I was going to make sure they knew that. The next few days felt like a blur. I barely slept, spending hours on the phone with my lawyer, my financial advisor, and a few key people who could help me make this happen. We needed to gather everything. Every little detail about Eddie's Eats, who owned it, what their debts were, how much money they were losing. I wanted to know it all. And I wasn't going to stop until I had the full picture. My lawyer was working on the legal side of things. He was digging through the company's filings, pulling up contracts, and getting all the information we'd need to make a proper offer. I didn't need just a quick deal. I needed to be sure that what I was buying wasn't going to be a waste of time or money. Meanwhile, I turned to my financial advisor. He helped me sort through the numbers, how much I could afford to offer, what would be a fair price, and what the company was actually worth. There were a lot of red flags. Eddie's Eats had been struggling for years. They weren't bankrupt, but they were on the edge. Their profits were shrinking, and they had debts piled up from failed expansions. The chain had its issues, no doubt about it. But I wasn't afraid of a challenge. I didn't mind fixing what was broken. In fact, I was counting on it. I spent hours going through reports and documents, trying to find anything that could give me an edge. There were whispers about mismanagement, about low employee morale, about food quality that had slipped over time. It seemed like the company was slowly sinking, but no one was doing anything to save it. That was my chance. As the days went on, my plan started to take shape. I wasn't just going to buy the company and walk away. I wanted to make real changes. I wanted to turn Eddie's Eats into something better, something more inclusive. I wanted to make it a place where people could come in, no matter who they were or how they looked, and feel like they belonged. It wasn't just about fixing the business, either. It was about setting an example for others, showing the world that a business could be profitable and successful while being kind, while being fair, while treating everyone with respect. One evening, I sat down with my lawyer to go over the final details. He handed me a thick folder full of information. The numbers looked good. They weren't great, but they weren't terrible either. The real potential was in what could be done to turn things around. I felt a surge of excitement. This was it. I was about to make my move. "We're ready," I said, looking at my lawyer. "Let's make them an offer." He nodded, and for the first time since this whole thing started, I felt confident. We were going to do this. I wasn't just buying a restaurant chain. I was going to change lives. I was going to give people a second chance, just like I had. And if the current owners of Eddie's Eats didn't want to change, well, they wouldn't be in charge much longer. The next day, we were going to send the offer. But tonight, I had one last thing to do. I drove back to that diner, the same one that had refused to serve me. I stood outside for a moment, staring up at the flickering sign. It felt different now. I wasn't just a guy who'd been turned away. I was someone who was going to change everything. The next morning, I woke up with a sense of purpose. Everything was ready. My lawyer had sent the offer to the current owners of Eddie's Eats. I could feel the excitement building inside me. I wasn't sure how they'd respond, but I knew this was the right step. The decision was made. There was no going back now. The phone rang as I was finishing my coffee. It was my lawyer. "We've got them," he said, his voice calm but with an edge of excitement. "They're ready to sell. They accepted the offer. You're officially the new owner of Eddie's Eats." My heart skipped a beat. It was happening. The company was mine now. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. I wasn't sure how to feel. Was I happy? Nervous? Both? Probably both. This was a huge responsibility, but it was also my chance to make a real difference. "Great," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "Let's make sure everything's in place." We need to move fast. We talked through the next steps. My lawyer would handle the legal paperwork, while my financial advisor would help me figure out how to handle the assets, debts, and restructuring. There was a lot to do, but I wasn't worried. I had a vision. And now, it was all within reach. Later that day, I met with my team. We gathered in the conference room, and I could see the confusion in their eyes. They didn't know exactly what was going on, but I was about to fill them in. I just bought a restaurant chain, I said, leaning against the table. Eddie's Eats. It's a small chain, but it's been struggling for years. And I'm going to fix it. Everyone stared at me, not sure what to say. Buying a restaurant chain was big, but changing the way it worked, that was even bigger. We're going to make it better, I continued. We're going to change the way people are treated in those restaurants. No one gets turned away for what they wear or who they are. It's about respect. I want every customer to feel welcome. There were murmurs around the room. People were starting to get the picture. They knew this wasn't just about food. It was about changing the culture of an entire company. We're going to need a new team, I said. We'll keep some of the old staff, of course, but we'll also be hiring people who are aligned with the values we want to set. Kindness, respect, and fairness. We'll train them. Make sure they understand why this is important. One of my team members raised a hand. What about the current staff at the locations? We'll talk to them. I said, we're not here to fire people. We're here to give them a second chance, just like we're giving this chain a second chance. Everyone seemed to understand. They knew it wasn't going to be easy, but they were ready for the challenge. I could see the determination in their faces. This wasn't just a business deal. This was about building something new, something that mattered. The next few days were a whirlwind. Meetings, contracts, more phone calls. We had to move fast. I needed to meet with the managers of all the locations to talk about the changes we were going to make. I wanted them to understand the vision, to be part of the new chapter. The first meeting was set for the following week. But before I could do any of that, there was one more thing to take care of. I had to go back to that diner, the one that had refused me. This time, I wasn't going to let it go. I was going in with a purpose. It had been a few days since I'd bought the company, but I hadn't gone back to Eddie's Eats yet. I wasn't sure what I was expecting, but I knew I had to go back to the same diner where they refused to serve me. Back to that moment when I decided that this wasn't just about a bad experience. This was about creating a change. I drove to the diner in my usual car, not the flashy one I'd used when I made the purchase. I didn't want to make it obvious right away. When I parked outside, I took a deep breath. It was the same old diner, the same red neon sign, the same worn-out windows, and the same few cars in the parking lot. The door jingled as I walked in, and the warm smell of fried food and coffee hit me immediately. The hostess was at the front again, this time with a different look on her face. She was busy chatting with another employee, but when she saw me, her smile faded for a second. I noticed her eyes flicked up and down at me. She didn't know me, but she probably recognized me as the guy who'd been turned away a few days ago. She walked over to me slowly, with the same expression she had when I first stepped inside. It was polite, but there was something in her eyes that told me she didn't think I belonged here. "Can I help you?" she asked, the words a little stiff. I smiled. "I'd like a table for one." Her eyes widened, and she paused, clearly confused. "Oh, sure, right this way," she said, her voice much more uncertain than before. I followed her to a table by the window, one of the best spots in the restaurant. It wasn't crowded, and as she set the menu down in front of me, I could tell she was trying to figure out what was going on. She probably didn't recognize me at first, or maybe she wasn't sure if I'd come to cause trouble. I didn't look angry. I didn't look upset. I just looked calm. "Thank you," I said, not looking up from the menu. "I'll have the special, please." Sure," she said, still looking at me like I was a puzzle she couldn't solve. Then, as she turned to walk away, I spoke again. "By the way, I'm the new owner of Eddie's Eats," I said casually. I thought it was important to introduce myself. The words hung in the air for a moment. She froze, her back still turned to me. She didn't move. For a second, I wondered if she would turn around and walk out. But then, she slowly turned to face me. Her expression was a mixture of surprise and shock. She clearly wasn't sure how to respond. You're the new owner?" she asked, barely able to find the words. "Yes," I said, smiling softly. "And I just wanted to let you know that things are going to change around here. We're going to make sure that everyone who walks through these doors feels welcome, no matter what they wear, no matter who they are." She didn't speak for a few moments, then nodded slowly. "I see." And I added, "I'm going to make sure we treat everyone with respect. Everyone who works here, and everyone who comes in." She seemed to process this, and for the first time, she looked a little less tense. Maybe she understood that the change was happening, whether she was ready for it or not. I wasn't here to punish her. I was here to make sure no one ever felt the way I did when I was turned away. When she returned with my meal, she was a little more relaxed. We didn't talk much, but as she set down the plate, she looked at me again, this time with a little less suspicion and a little more curiosity. It wasn't about getting revenge anymore. It was about making sure that a place like this could be better. It was about showing people that things could be different, that they could be kinder, more welcoming. And that was just the beginning. The next few weeks were a whirlwind. I was officially the owner of Eddie's Eats, and it felt like a dream. But it wasn't the dream I had expected. It wasn't just about turning a profit or managing a chain of diners. It was about real change, and that was harder than I had imagined. First, I started by meeting with the managers. I wanted to get a feel for how things worked, or, more accurately, how they didn't work. The atmosphere at most of the locations was tense. There was no real sense of teamwork. Employees felt overworked, and customers often complained about slow service. But the worst part was the culture. Some employees treated customers differently based on how they looked or dressed. Some felt like they could get away with being rude or dismissive. This was the kind of thing I wanted to fix first. During the first few meetings, I explained my vision. I wanted Eddie's Eats to be a place where everyone felt welcome. Customers, no matter their background, should always feel respected. Employees, too, should feel valued and supported. No more discrimination, no more bad attitudes. The focus had to shift from just serving food to creating an experience that made people want to come back, not just for the food, but for the kindness. It wasn't easy. Many of the managers were used to doing things a certain way, and they weren't thrilled about my plan. They were comfortable with the old routine. But I didn't back down. I had a clear vision, and I was determined to see it through. I started by holding training sessions for all the staff. We went over what it meant to create a welcoming environment, how to treat every customer with respect, and how to recognize the power of kindness. I brought in outside trainers to help with the customer service aspect. We focused on how to handle complaints gracefully, how to make every customer feel like they were the most important person in the room. The changes weren't instant, but they started to happen. Some of the old staff resisted at first. They didn't want to change. But slowly, they began to see the difference. When they treated people with respect, the customers responded. They started coming back more often, leaving better tips, and even telling their friends. The word spread. The culture of Eddie's Eats began to shift. At the same time, I worked on updating the diner's look. The booths were reupholstered, the walls got a fresh coat of paint, and the menus were redesigned. But the most important changes weren't the physical ones. It was the atmosphere. The warmth of the place started to come from the people, not just the food. Employees started smiling more. They began to feel proud of the place they worked in. I noticed them chatting with customers, asking how their day was, and laughing together in the back. It was the kind of place I'd imagined from the beginning. The transformation wasn't easy. There were days when I wondered if it was all worth it. There were setbacks. Some people didn't like the new way of doing things, but when I saw the smiles on customers' faces when they thanked us for the great service, I knew it was worth every effort. One afternoon, I walked into one of the Eddie's Eats locations just as a family was leaving. The father stopped me as he passed by. "I just wanted to say thank you," he said with a smile. "This place feels different now. We've been coming here for years, and it's never felt as welcoming as it does now. We'll definitely be back." Those words meant more to me than anything else. They were proof that the changes were working. Eddie's Eats was no longer just a restaurant. It was a place where people felt like they belonged. Months passed, and things at Eddie's Eats continued to improve. I was proud of what we had accomplished, but I knew that there was still more to do. Change takes time, and while we had made great strides, I wanted to make sure the restaurant chain's transformation wasn't just a temporary shift. It had to be something lasting, something that became a part of the company's identity. One afternoon, I stood in one of the busiest locations, just watching. The atmosphere was so different now. People were laughing, talking, and the staff was genuinely engaged with the customers. No one seemed hurried or stressed. There was a calm energy in the air, a feeling of comfort. It was exactly what I had hoped for when I decided to take control. I had always wanted Eddie's Eats to be more than just a place to eat. It had to be a place to connect, a place where people felt at home. As the days passed, more and more customers came in, telling me how much they appreciated the changes. One woman told me that she had always felt uncomfortable at the restaurant because of the way she was treated by the staff. But after the changes, she felt welcome every time. Another family shared that their children loved coming in because the staff was so kind and patient with them. Hearing stories like these made me realize that this was bigger than just turning a profit. It was about making a real difference in people's lives. One evening, as I was finishing up at the office, I received an email from a news outlet. They had heard about the changes at Eddie's Eats and wanted to do a feature on the restaurant chain. I couldn't believe it. A few months ago, this restaurant chain had been on the verge of closing down, and now it was getting attention for all the right reasons. The story would be about how a company could be successful by focusing on kindness and respect instead of just profit. It felt surreal. The article came out a few weeks later, and the response was incredible. People from all over the country reached out, sharing their own stories of how they had been treated poorly at restaurants, but how Eddie's Eats was different now. Customers were praising us for the changes, and many said they would choose Eddie's Eats over other places because of the way they were treated. With all the positive attention, the business started to grow. More locations opened, and soon, Eddie's Eats became a symbol of how a restaurant could be both profitable and kind. Employees were happier, too. They felt like they were part of something meaningful, not just a job. I saw people taking pride in their work. They were excited to come in each day, knowing that they were making a difference, even if it was just in the small ways. But for me, the biggest reward was hearing how the changes had impacted the customers. I started receiving letters, emails, and even phone calls from people who told me that they had been inspired by what we had done. Some shared how they had made their own changes in their communities, how they started treating others with more kindness and respect. It was proof that the impact had spread beyond just Eddie's Eats. We were starting a movement, one small act of kindness at a time. Sitting back and reflecting on everything that had happened, I realized that this wasn't just about the diner. It wasn't even about the business. It was about creating something that would continue to make people feel valued, long after they left our doors. I had started with a simple idea, to turn around a restaurant chain. But in the end, it became so much more. It was about changing how people treated each other, one meal at a time. And in the end, I knew I had made the right choice. Not just for me, but for everyone who walked through the doors of Eddie's Eats.